In the realm of American politics, few figures have sparked as much controversy as Donald Trump. His first administration was marked by bold economic policies, some of which, like tariffs, were designed to protect American industries but ended up being costly for both consumers and businesses. As the U.S. economy struggled with the repercussions of the former president's trade wars, many Americans found themselves facing higher prices on everything from groceries to electronics. Fast forward to the present, and Trump's rhetoric surrounding tariffs remains as resolute as ever. Despite widespread warnings from major corporations, including Walmart, Black & Decker, and AutoZone, that tariffs will lead to price hikes, Trump insists that his policies will not cost Americans anything. In this video, we will dive deep into the reality behind Trump's tariff policies and their potential consequences on the American economy. We'll explore the claims he makes, the corporate responses, and the impact on the everyday American consumer. Moreover, we'll see how Trump's refusal to back down on these tariffs is rooted not in economic logic, but in political ego. 1. The origins of Trump's tariff strategy. Donald Trump's approach to trade was one of his most high-profile policy initiatives during his first term in office. From the moment he took office, Trump began instituting tariffs, particularly targeting China. He justified these actions as necessary to protect American jobs, revive manufacturing industries, and reduce the trade deficit. He often portrayed tariffs as a tool to restore fairness to trade relationships and bring back jobs that had been outsourced overseas. However, the consequences of these policies were more complex than Trump had predicted. The most immediate effect was the retaliation from China and other nations, leading to a trade war that, according to many economists, hurt U.S. businesses more than it helped. While Trump promised that China and other countries would bear the brunt of these tariffs, the reality was that American consumers were the ones who ultimately paid the price. The tariffs were placed on a wide array of goods, everything from steel and aluminum to electronics and everyday consumer products. This led to higher costs for American companies that imported these goods, and they, in turn, passed those increased costs on to consumers. 2. The corporate backlash. As Trump's tariff war continued, major corporations began to speak out about the economic damage it was causing. Walmart, Black & Decker, and AutoZone were among the most vocal, warning that the proposed tariffs would increase prices for their customers. These corporations, which rely on cheap imports to keep costs low, directly contradicted Trump's assertion that tariffs would not affect American consumers. For example, Walmart, one of the largest retailers in the world, has a significant portion of its products sourced from overseas. If tariffs are imposed on these goods, Walmart faces higher costs, which are inevitably passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. In other words, Trump's economic policies, while aimed at improving American manufacturing, would burden the very consumers he promised to help. The same is true for other major players like Black & Decker, a company that imports tools and equipment from overseas manufacturers. The company made it clear that higher tariffs would force them to raise prices to offset the increased costs of goods. AutoZone, a major auto parts retailer, also voiced similar concerns, noting that the tariffs could have an adverse effect on their pricing and, by extension, their customers. This corporate pushback is critical because it directly contradicts Trump's claim that tariffs would not hurt the American people. Companies are clearly signaling that tariffs would lead to higher prices, but Trump has repeatedly insisted that his trade policies would not burden consumers. 3. Trump's response: ignoring reality. Despite these warnings, Trump remained resolute in his stance. His response to concerns about rising prices was dismissive at best. In one interview, Trump argued that tariffs were not costing Americans anything and that they were, in fact, creating a better economy. His repeated claim that tariffs were a way to stop wars and protect American interests was an attempt to frame his policies as not only economically sound but also geopolitically necessary. The issue here is that Trump's response doesn't reflect the realities of the situation. Corporations are not only warning about price hikes, they are taking action to adjust to the new reality. Prices will go up, and there is no denying that fact. The question becomes, why is Trump so unwilling to acknowledge this? Part of it can be attributed to his political ego. Trump's approach to leadership often involves refusing to back down, regardless of the evidence that suggests a different course of action. Once he declared that tariffs were a brilliant idea, it became politically impossible for him to admit that they might have unintended consequences. Admitting that the tariffs were wrong would be a sign of weakness, something Trump has always been unwilling to do. Instead, he doubled down, insisting that the tariffs were necessary for national security and that they wouldn't affect everyday consumers, even as evidence mounted to the contrary. 4. The irony of high prices. One of the most ironic aspects of Trump's tariff policy is that, during his first campaign for the presidency, he repeatedly railed against high prices. He made a point of emphasizing how much Americans were paying for groceries, claiming that prices were skyrocketing under the Obama administration. Indeed, in his victory speech after winning the 2016 election, Trump pointed to high food prices as one of the reasons for his success, promising that his economic policies would bring these prices down. Fast forward to today, and it is clear that Trump's tariffs will do the exact opposite of what he promised. Prices are set to rise across the board. The very high prices Trump once claimed were an example of the failures of the previous administration are now being ushered in under his own watch, thanks to the tariffs he has imposed. This inconsistency not only highlights the flaws in Trump's economic thinking but also shows his inability to adapt his policies in response to new information. 5. Trump's failure to offer real solutions. Another glaring issue with Trump's economic strategy is his failure to offer real, substantive solutions to the challenges facing American workers. When asked about healthcare, Trump's response was equally vague and disheartening. He acknowledged that Obamacare was imperfect, but offered nothing concrete to replace it. He spoke of concepts for a new healthcare plan, but never presented a fully developed proposal. This pattern of vague promises and lack of follow-through is consistent with Trump's approach to many of the nation's issues. Whether it's healthcare, trade, or national security, Trump seems more interested in making bold claims and attacking his political opponents than in offering detailed, workable solutions. This reluctance to provide actual plans is a significant failure of leadership, one that ultimately leaves Americans facing the consequences. 6. The bigger picture: politics over policy. At the heart of Trump's tariff policies is not a genuine concern for American workers or the economy, but rather a desire to undermine the legacy of his political opponents. During his first term, Trump made it clear that his goal was not to create sustainable, bipartisan solutions, but to dismantle the policies of his predecessor, President Barack Obama. The Affordable Care Act, ACA, and other key policies were targeted not because they were flawed, but because they were championed by Democrats. This pattern of reactionary politics is evident in his tariff strategy as well. Trump's tariffs weren't just about protecting American jobs. They were also about asserting his dominance on the world stage and proving that he could reshape the global economy. The problem, however, is that these policies have real-world consequences for ordinary Americans. It's easy for Trump to champion tariffs in speeches, but when the reality hits and prices rise for everyday goods, it's the American consumer who bears the brunt of the cost. Donald Trump's tariff policies, despite his insistence that they wouldn't cost Americans anything, have already begun to have a detrimental impact on the economy. Major corporations have warned that tariffs will lead to higher prices, and history has shown that when the cost of goods goes up, consumers are the ones who suffer. Trump's refusal to acknowledge this reality is a clear example of how his political ego prevents him from taking responsibility for the consequences of his actions. The irony of his situation is staggering. He won the presidency in part by promising to lower prices for Americans, yet his tariff policies will do the opposite. As we move forward, it's clear that Trump's tariffs were never about economic protectionism or helping American workers. They were about asserting his dominance and undermining the policies of his political opponents. This is not the way to build a prosperous economy. If Trump continues down this path, Americans will continue to pay the price, both literally and figuratively. The question remains, will the American people realize the true cost of these policies before it's too late?